let us get into the conversation. Let us talk about immunity. Have you ever wondered how it is that we go from a state where something would cause us disease, and then in another moment, the same thing no longer has an impact or an effect upon us to cause us the disease? It is because the body would have developed what we call immunity. So basically, in a nutshell, immunity is basically the body's ability to mount a response in the defense against an attack from an external entity that could compromise or jeopardize the body's ability to function efficiently and effectively. So sometimes the best way to mount an attack is to have your soldiers ready and waiting for the invader before the invader comes. Because when the invader comes, you can't be training your soldiers, you can't be structuring your resources in order to defend the body, because resources would have to be pulled from other areas. So if you have a set already trained and ready to go, then that there is a positioning that the body desires to be in. And when this happens, mechanistically, naturally, biologically, we call it immunity. So, in a nutshell, that is basically what immunity is. And in order for us to have immunity, we have to consider the immune system. The immune system, or IS, is a completely uh, complicated to a degree uh, mechanism system that is tightly controlled. It includes tissues, it includes organs, it includes cells, biological mediators that coordinates to defend a host organism against the intrusion of foreign substances or abnormal cell origin. So yes, the body can develop an immunity towards itself, because sometimes yourself cells would find themselves in a situation where apoptosis, the process of cell death, is retarded to the degree in which they are growing disproportionate to their programming. And when that happens, they become burden on the whole system because they are out of alignment. And in this situation, they will be classified in some instances as autoimmune disorders. All right. But let us get into immunity. Immunity basically refers to the process by which a host organism protects itself from attack by an external or internal agent. So we need to have that definition down. Immunity also confers protection from non self and abnormal self element, which are controlled at different levels. So the body function based on a hierarchy system and different lines of defense. So you have your primary line of defense, you have your secondary line of defense, and you have your tertiary line of defense. So we have our skin, which is basically what we consider our primary line of defense. Then we have our different membranes. We have the villi in our nostrils, and all of this, which is a secondary line of defense. And we also have our antibodies that are inside of us, which is another line of defense. So the response and elimination of organisms and unwanted cell is accomplished through the cellular, which includes cells, or the humoral mechanisms. The cellular defense mechanism is mediated by, guess which cells? The T cells. we have the macrophages, and these function in eliminating, actually, let's think about it again. For the cellular immunity, we're going to have our T cells, yes. We're going to have our macrophages. We're going to have our dendritic cells, which functions to eliminate the viruses, the bacteria, the cancer cells, and other cellular pathogen. Then for the humoral mechanisms, this is comprised of the B cells and its specific antibodies, along with complement components that are produced in the plasma, the saliva, and bodily secretion. So, for the cellular, we have the T cells, and for the humoral, we have the B cells. All right. So even though both the B cells and T cells work together in the immunity process, the T cell is for the cellular, and the B cell are usually found in the humoral immunity processes and mechanisms. So just bear those differences in mind so that we can differentiate as is needed. So the humoral mechanism is comprised of the B cells and are specific antibodies that produce along with complements components that are produced in the plasma, the saliva, and bodily secretion. So our bodily secretion have our DNA, yes, but it also has our immunity or our immune cascades already pre-packaged. Just for adventure there is an attack. So we have to be mindful of how the body works and how the body operates. So these things are can be taken into consideration when we're thinking about how is it that we are going to defend against a particular pathogen. As we move further down the lineage, as we try to ensure that our body is maintaining homeostasis, it is functioning efficiently and effectively, we have to have our antibodies in place. We have to have our immunoglobulins having specific roles and responsibility, especially when it comes on to transfusion medicine, because antigen present on transfused cell may cause a reaction in the receiving patient or the recipient patient, and this can complicate the therapy process, because you know that giving blood or blood products in transfusion medicine, the idea is for a therapeutic process. If the hemoglobin is low, you want to give these products to only increase the hemoglobin if that is your objective. You don't want to give the products to increase the hemoglobin or to cause a further decrease in the hemoglobin if that was your objective. If a person have DIC, you may want to give them fresh frozen plasma in order for them to have their mechanisms of compensatory processes beginning, so that their bodies can balance uh, the required effects in comparison to that which is coming upon the system. So many different processes are taking place simultaneously in a cascade reaction. So one thing happened, then triggers another thing. So it's like a well-oiled machine operation that is taking place. So God has made the human body so miraculously and defined in a way that it can function independently of our intervention. But when we have situations where we misappropriate, and in situation when we are exposed prematurely to or exposed prolonged to different ills, it causes a compromise in our bodily function. And when this compromise occurred, it creates a strain on the system, and this strain causes us to need assistance from external entities. But the immune system is there to protect us from the cold virus, the rhinovirus, uh, the influenza virus, the flu virus, and whatever other virus or bacterial pathogen, whether it is syphilis, whether it is uh, Treponema pallidum, we're talking about, whether it is T-vag, whether it is whatever bacterial vaginosis, whether it is trichomonas, whether it is chlamydia, whatever it is, the body has mechanisms already in place to protect us. But if the body does not have the prerequisite resources, it will not be able to function efficiently and effectively. When it comes on to immunohematology or blood banking, we considered the alloantibodies and autoantibodies of importance in routine examination and testing of blood and blood products, because this gives us an idea as to the compatibility index and the likelihood of compatibility taking place. This detection is dependent upon several factors, including the binding forces between the antigen and the antibody, properties of antibodies itself, and individual host characteristics. So when we have antigen antibody complex formation taking place, or the reaction, these are influenced by a number of factors. So the factors that are critical include the distance, the antigen antibody ratio, the pH, the temperature, and the immunoglobulin type. So all of these things has to be taken into consideration when we are doing our typing, when we're doing our immunoglobulin assessment, when we are doing our compatibility testing. So we have to be very mindful in the gamut of things. So both the traditional and non-traditional testing laboratory utilize these same principal mechanisms. It's the factors that affect antigen antibody reaction are standard across, because we use basically a standardized system. So the distance, the antigen antibody ratio, the pH, the temperature, and the immunoglobulin type. So these things need to be taken into consideration. All right. But before we go, let us consider the comparison of the major mechanisms of the immune system. So we have the innate immunity or the natural immunity. And when we talk about the innate immunity or the natural immunity, we're thinking about the primary line of defense. We're thinking about early evolutionary development. Then we're thinking about non-specific, which is natural, meaning present at birth. Then we have immediate availability taking place right in those situations, and then we have maybe physical or biochemical mechanisms or a combination of auto defense mechanisms. Then we have mechanism that does not alter or repeated exposure to any specific antigen. All right, so in the natural or the innate situation, this is already present, and it gives us an advantage of or over the intruder that is coming in. So we have a first line of defense to take us as the body develop in the acquired or the adaptive immunity process, where it is more specific. So in the acquired or the adaptive immunity, we have supplementary protection provided by the innate immunity. So later, as we develop and the vertebra are developed and the body specializes and the body identifies the different epitopes and binding site, then the body produces specific antibodies towards the intruder, so that if there is anything that looks like that, the body already has those lock and key mechanisms ready to sequester and to destroy. So in this phase or this state of the immunity, what happens is that we have memory taking place. So the body has the ability to respond with each successive encounter faster and faster. So if you attack times in subsequent or in sequence, then each time the reaction time of the body is going to be faster and faster. So it's going to see like the infection, the disease did not even have a chance to, and then eventually there will be no real need for the disease to continue attacking, because the body would have developed such an immunity towards a disease, a specific disease, that there is no benefit in causing a disease for the disease that is acting on the body. All right. So let us get back into the whole scheme of things. So we have a beautiful idea in our mind. So in the first line of defense, we have the physical, which includes the intact skin, the mucous membrane, the cilia, the cough reflex. Then for the biological, secretions, because our secretions are also a line of defense. We have the sweat, we have the tears, we have the saliva, we have the mucus. And pH also plays a very important part, just like the vagina of the female has a very low pH, that there is a line of defense, because most things don't like the pH of the vagina and they'll stay away from the vagina. So that there is very encouraging for the vagina. So now let us move into the second line of defense. We have internal components, which we have the cellular. So when we think about the cellular, we're thinking about phagocytosis or phagocytic cells, right? So we're thinking about the macrophage, the dendritic cells, the monocytes, the PNS, the large granular leukocytes, the natural killer cells. And then when we have the humoral component, we're thinking about our complement alternative pathway. We are thinking about the cytokines, the interferons, interleukins, and the acute inflammatory reactions that take place. So this here is our second line of defense. Then as time progresses, we have our third line of defense. And when we have this line of defense, we're going to think about the cellular. We're thinking about the lymphocytes. And when we think about lymphocyte, we're thinking about the T cells. All right. And we're thinking about the helper cells. And we're thinking about the cytotoxic T cells, all right, or the killer cells, right? Then we also have our T memory cells as well. Then we move down to our B cell component, in which we have our B memory cells and we have our plasma cells. And these are our humoral cells, which produce the antibodies, and they activate different pathways, like the classical pathway. They activate it, and they also engage in the cytokine mechanism. So knowing all these processes gives us an idea as to how advanced our body is naturally in mounting up a response, reacting to the response, and then allowing us to have a long life as we enjoy things as they were meant to be enjoyed. All right. So there are a lot of immune mechanisms that take place. There are a lot of processes that take place in order for us to maintain our bodily function. So in a little while, we're going to go into the specifics of different components so that we can have a better appreciation as to what each component does and how does the body benefit from the involvement and interaction with these components.